Sometimes I don't know exactly how the audio is for things I'm listening to that I'm putting through the feed. I'm looking at the decibels, and the decibels to me make sense, but I'm not on the other end of my own streams, so it's always really difficult to know without getting like an actual interaction feedback. I think that's a good enough intro for the Bumbleskum. Am I not? Yep, okay. For the Bumbleskum Morning Design Show. It is currently 4 a.m. here in dark northern Wisconsin. Let's get a little bit of an update going for what's happening here. Let me see. The lighting's about to change very dramatically in just like 2 seconds. Boom! Oh gosh, now I've got orange on the face. Well, it looks like it's getting to be a nice. It's a really cold 41. We just had rain the other day, so it's been a little lingering, but it looks like we're going to get a little bit more rain today as well, getting up to a max of 53 degrees Fahrenheit. Not the best weather in the world. Maybe if it stops raining soon enough, I can do some shooting I need to get done for a project that requires kind of a shitty day out. I don't know. We'll see. We'll find out. So welcome to the Bumbleskum Morning Design Show, where every morning, or most mornings, or whatever mornings I, think to do it or have topics to do it on, I'd like to talk a bit about, design philosophy in certain ways involving tabletop RPGs specifically. I could talk about other games, but I think it's a little bit more interesting to focus at least into things like D&D or Pathfinder or Fate or Blades in the Dark, what have you, Viacen. I might reference other shows. I might reference other games that I've got experience with, just to get some kind of a reference for a point that I want to make. So you know what? Let me just give a little bit of background on me. It's your boy Bumbleskum, and I've been playing role-playing games for about a little over a decade. I didn't get to start seriously playing them until about 2009. Maybe 2008, but I think 2009 is when I want to say, like early 2008. No, I think late 2008 makes a lot more sense to me, because I moved in 2009 for a bit, so I think it was before that I was playing D&D more often. So it'd have to be 2008. But I digress. It's 2021 now. It's been about 13 years, I think, if I did my math correctly. I've been playing role-playing games seriously for about 13 years. I tried getting into D&D 3rd edition earlier, but it was mostly with my brother, and my brother was kind of a prick about it. Very much of a gatekeeper, because he didn't want me hanging out with his friends. Kind of those kind of, sibling relationships that you get. So I didn't really get to play too much of that. I tried the D20 Star Wars system at first also, and that didn't go really great either. Just trying it out. I didn't really get a grasp on some of the rules. Sometimes it takes me like 2 tries on something to grasp it. But once I grasp it pretty hard. But yeah, so I've been doing that. And then when I started seriously playing role-playing games, it was D&D 4th edition that was out at the time. And it was still relatively new. Because I remember, because you don't get bards or barbarians or gnomes in the Player's Handbook in 4th edition. Those came out in Player's Handbook 2, and I remember specifically not having those options when I started playing it, which I knew what those were ahead of time from 3.5, and just kind of having a general interest in total for the subject. So I started playing at the local game store. My friends, they were friends with the game store owner, so we all, we had access to like all sorts of minis and the store itself for playing. Sometimes we get to play late after the thing closed. So overall, it was a pretty good experience to start out with. So I played 4th edition for quite a lot. That was my major game for a while it was still out, and almost until it ended, really, the support. But, at some point we transitioned over to Pathfinder, which I think I fell in love with a lot more, because it is based off the 3.5 rules, and the 3.5 rules are pretty... well, they were popular for a reason, I know there's a lot of, bloat with the system now, in retrospect, but that's honestly because of how popular the system was at the time. And, Pathfinder eased up a bit on some of the more complicated rules, and it was pretty nice. But, so I played Pathfinder for quite a long time. I started dabbling in 5th edition just a few years ago, maybe 2 years ago, and then I just started seriously playing 5th edition roughly a year and a half ago. And part of that has to do with, accessibility of who I can play with, and that's currently 5th edition players. I've tried dabbling in other role-playing games, so one of my favorite systems is Fate. Fate Core. I use a little bit of Fate Condensed in there. Delta Green I've tried dabbling in. There's a lot of systems that I'm interested in. I've gotten a lot of rule books, and I read a lot of books, and I listen to a lot of actual plays for the better chunk of a little over a decade. So I've gotten a familiarity with a lot of different systems in that time, and what they're into and what they're about. I listen to a lot of design casts, just to get a little bit more favor in my brain of what exactly is good. Oh, well, thank you. It's a nice shirt. I bought it a few years ago. It's one of my favorite shirts. I don't wear it often enough for how much I enjoy this shirt. Usually if I'm going out or having something special, I'll try to wear it just because it's a good look, I think, on me. So I'm going to quickly remove that lighting. Okay, yeah, so... my yeah, no, patterns. I love patterns. The older I get, the more I'm into patterns. I grew up a lot with graphic tees and cargo pants, and now I'm my fashion's evolved a lot more. It used to be up until high school, I primarily wore windbreakers, and then it was more graphic tees and cargo pants. And it's evolved. I try to wear a little bit more interesting color, a little more interesting patterns. The button up, when it's nice like this, I think looks really well. I said well. I misuse well. I use well too much, where some people might use good in the wrong way. I use well instead, because I'm a fool. But anyways, I'm digressing just a little bit. It's fine. It's a nice little casual morning conversation. Yeah, so, I've gotten I think I have a pretty decent understanding of a lot of game design. I've been trying to design games for a better chunk, more than a decade also. It's an interest, it's a passion. I've been designing games for... Oh, no, you're no distraction. I've got the chat up on the screen anyway, so it's there to interact with. So, I could ramble easily, no matter what. So if you feel free to chat. I'll respond. I think it's more interesting that way. A little bit more dynamic of a topic can happen. I appreciate the compliments on the shirt. Like I said, it's one of my favorite shirts. I think it all works. It's a nice easy morning where we just talk about design and drink some coffee and yeah. I've been designing games since I was a kid as well. I used to play heavily with Legos as a kid, designing different things with Legos, different systems, different combat systems with Legos. Before I knew what role-playing games were, I was role-playing with my toys. I grew up with JRPGs. A lot of influential stuff from that. I always tried to mimic the Final Fantasy Tactics series in my combat, which, looking back on it, it's the most out of the JRPGs. Their JRPGs were based on D&D, and they kind of evolved out of that. But then tactical RPGs is more of a it's a little closer to home when it comes to D&D. And maybe that's why when I played 4th edition, I didn't mind as much, because I was used to things like Final Fantasy Tactics, in that grid-based combat and that interesting, like, I felt you could have interesting role play in that kind of a limited game sense, because of that. I didn't grow up playing 1st edition, 2nd edition, 3rd edition. So I saw a little bit more potential out of it. And, I actually plan on talking a bit more about that in just a bit. But I just wanted to say, yeah, I've slept for a few hours now. Well, tried to sleep. I have some pretty bad insomnia as of like the last month or so. I lay down for about a 3-hour period, maybe get an hour and a half out of that, and then I'm up. At least a little bit of rested. It's those tactical RPGs, I think, they, especially the ones where you can purchase your own units, like Final Fantasy Tactics can, you get a little bit more personalization with the crew and the party, and you have these more interesting dynamics with them as you build them up as your own, and you have, I mean, sure, they're not the main characters, so they don't get as much of the interesting story roleplay, but they always feel just as part of it as the main character, because you get attached to them over the time as you design them and build them from the scratch, naming them and designing them. I think it adds a lot of personality to them, in the same way it does when you're building your characters for D&D or other role-playing games. I have a can of Pepsi here, and it's the morning. I have a cup of coffee as well, but I have this Pepsi because it's too hot still, and my throat gets parched easily nowadays. But I prefer to be just drinking coffee for this. I need to start brewing it sooner, so that way I can get in here with just a nice cup of coffee. I like the aesthetic, drinking a nice cup of coffee in the morning while I'm chatting away. But yeah, so I think the design philosophy in some of these games are kind of fascinating, and I always love to I love to break down systems, build up systems, kind of go through systems and design them, and make for them. I like the customization of aspect, and D&D gives you a little bit better chance to do that than a video game would. I even back when I first started, immediately I got invested in the DM role. I enjoy, not necessarily because I like the control, but I have these ideas for stories, and I have these ideas for content options. I designed, a Final Fantasy Tactics Dragoon type class, a Lancer type class for 4th edition, and 4th edition I felt was very easy to design for based off their ability systems. It just gave a good hard line of like it was easy to read how to design a class out of those because of how balanced everything was in that game system. But yeah, oh gosh, yeah, I do want to talk about 4th edition a bit, actually, because there was a lot of good things in 4th edition that I think don't get the credit it deserves. A lot of people felt betrayed, I think, by the switch of their beloved 3.5 to 4th edition, and they didn't see some of the more interesting choices that were given to us in a system, because it wasn't the same, and it was, and I will agree. There's there's bits of 4th edition that are too gamey and not enough options in terms of non-combat, which I think is what people were kind of clamoring for. But I think let me see how this is. Still a bit hot. Probably not as strong as I would have liked it. I think I didn't put enough coffee grounds in there. Yeah, so in 3.5, it's popular for a reason. It's got a lot to it, a lot of customization, and I think that's what people really enjoyed about 3.5 was the customization levels you got out of the system. Yeah. It's the thing is like the more options a player has, the more options a DM will also have. 3.5, you had so much to work with. You had templates, and the books. There was so many books and so many different. Like I said, there's so many systems based off of 3.5 that you started getting more ideas and more options for how you could play 3.5. And like you look at it back then, and it was the options that made it so wonderful, but it was also all of the options that made it so inaccessible to people, because when you get into the culture of D&D, you bring along with it everything that D&D includes. And 3.5, it had options, but it also had a lot of bloat. There was a lot of more options than were manageable for a lot of it. And a lot of people, there's a lot of things you can talk about, like like a barbarian who throws great swords, doing massive damage in these ways. There's so many ways to game the system and min-max, and that's where you get a lot of these power gaming problems, is because of all these minute options that a lot of power gamers enjoy solving, finding ways to get optimal builds and whatever. So it's interesting to me. I don't think the gamification of 4th edition was actually a problem the way I think a lot of the critiques were given to it. So 3.5 had all these options, and its biggest problem was too many options. Well, and it's a little interesting. 4th edition was extremely accessible. 4th edition, it gave you, you had options. Everyone had options, not just spellcasters. They had different kind of techniques. I've got the book open right here, and I'm just gonna read an entry from the fighter, just to give a kind of an example of the type of options there were for characters that weren't just the cleric or the wizard or the warlock. So for instance, let's see. They started with like character options. So like for instance, at first level, at will, a fighter could cleave. He could take damage to adjacent enemies after they attack. It's one of those things where like you get these interesting combat options. You have like a spinning attack, you have a passing attack, you have a lot more maneuverability and options as a fighter, which I think was a direct response to what was considered just the imbalance between spellcasters and fighters at higher levels and lower levels. I think they wanted to really balance it out. And I think that's kind of actually where they went wrong. It's not the gamification of the game, it was the balancing. It's D&D inherently can't be a balanced game, I think, for the sake of itself to be interesting. I'd like all of the options that fighters get, but I think it's just the idea that they balanced it too hard. And so I mentioned the accessibility of it all. So I think it's all easy to read. It came with ability cards. You could purchase ability cards, like a dex of ability cards, and you could easily track everything you had, or you could print them out even, and it was easy to just really track everything. And not only that, but anyone who plays 5th edition now is probably well aware of D&D Beyond, which is an online, database with character building, encounter building, campaign tracking tools. And 4th edition had that. 4th edition, Wizards of the Coast had their own app that was like that you could use on your computer. And you would have access to all these books, all of the design stuff that came with the magazines. Those options were all included. You could sort through, and they were really developing this system. And it was, to me, it was probably why I got so hard into 4th edition was there was so much more accessibility with tracking everything. And at that point also there was programs like Hero Lab, that was booming, where you could easily other apps to help you build stuff. But really, D&D Beyond is a spiritual successor to what Wizards did with 4th edition, with the accessibility. So I think, I'll mention, I think the reason 5th edition is more popular than 4th edition is the fact that they decided to unbalance the game a bit more. I complain about this a lot with encounter building. I don't think encounter building is great in 5th edition. I think it's not well put together on what is or is not a threat. I know they try to accumulate for like an adventuring day, but even that's but you add on experience and deadliness for more encounters throughout a day. But in the end, that's supposed to make up for, what would be a raw encounter. So even like a solo monster should theoretically be as deadly as its counterpart in Minions. Because they're already kind of adjusting for that. But it doesn't work out that way. I only throw deadly encounters at my players because it's so unbalanced in the way it's designed now. And I think that's a healthy option, a healthy reasoning for the game, to have that unbalance between classes, between monsters. It adds a little bit more excitement and intrigue. There's another thing. I mean, I'll get into. Obviously, I'm going to get into spells. That was another big critique of 4th edition was the spell casting, but I want to say, I inherently think the problem with 4th edition is 100% the balancing aspect. It's not the gamification, and I can't think it's the gamification because 5th edition is significantly more limiting than 4th edition was. The things you can do in 5th edition, the things you got as a character in 5th edition, is dramatically less than you got from 4th edition. There's not the customizability that the other editions give you, and that's an interesting to me aspect of like 5th edition. It's the simplification and the gamification is still popular. I think people just don't realize that's what they're interested in. Because, again, 4th edition gave you more options than 5th edition did. 4th edition also gave you a lot more tried to give you a lot more world building than 5th edition has. Two of my favorite books are the Draconomicons, which give you so much interesting information on dragons that aren't even just combat related, like how their life cycles, what happens when they die, a little bit of their biology. I think people don't give 4th edition enough credit for what they were doing, because they were so... They missed the imbalance of 3.5, I think. It's you still got more options in 3.5 than you did in 4th, but 4th edition you got more options than you do in 5th, and people like 5th edition. So its options are nice. It's something I miss when I'm playing 5th edition is options. But I think the problem is it is more accessible to not have options. That's why they went with the subclasses system that they did. Is it basically set you on a track without options, but like it's an illusion of options, really. It's you get, they start out with like I think 2 or 3 subclasses options, and that itself feels like enough, because I don't think players often get the chance to explore the entirety of a system anyway. So I think once you're like, oh, okay, well, I've got 3 options in any specific class, and there's like 8 or 10 classes or whatever, and that's so much, you have so much that you'll be able to do at some point already, including everything. So options I don't think is necessarily. It's 3rd edition, I think, what made their options interesting versus 4th edition's options. I think that's something I want to touch on too. I think what made it more interesting was the way you could personalize. So I think when you have the ability to personalize a character versus, you're going to choose the options that give you more personalization. But like if your interest is in gamification, or the simplicity of a game, you're going to go with what's simple. And 5th edition is simple. They limit your options and kind of just give you a general, hey, just go for it, and don't worry about hard rules on a lot of these concepts. And I think 4th edition is too in between. It tries to cater to both parties, and it doesn't end up giving either party the satisfaction they want. Because like I said, I think the options that you get in 4th edition are interesting. I think the fighter abilities are very interesting. There are several classes in 4th edition that we have yet to see in 5th edition that are just interesting. They have the Warlord. They have the Avenger. I'm trying to think. There's another one I thought was really interesting. Oh, there's a player race, the Deva. They've replaced Devas with Azamars, in 5th edition, which is fascinating. It's a thing that's fascinating to me, because Azamars I always associate with Pathfinder, because D&D had Devas, and they're very different concepts, even though they're so similar. They're both angelic heritage. 4th edition also brought us the Dragonborn as a core race, which 5th edition has done, and I think it's a race that people have embraced pretty hard in 5th edition, more so I think than they did in 4th edition. They had Eladrins as a core race. I just think it's literally interesting. And okay, so I think the criticisms that I've heard of 4th edition, I think the only good argument I've read about the problems with 4th edition then is the theory I've read where it's about the spell casting in general. I think what makes it feel like it blends together with fighters and stuff is the fact that spellcasters don't get the ability to be blasters or utility. And I think it's because every class got the same amount of at-will, encounter, daily, and utility of options at every level. So you always had like a certain amount of utility that you could do, which everyone got utility, but like spellcasters, utility is the best that they got, and that was like a fourth of their options, maybe less, as per level, and so you don't really get the ability to really focus on how to play outside of combat. D&D inherently is a combat system. That's what it does best. Your character options, generally, it's built around the idea that you will be in combat. You will be fighting. But I think what gives people interest in role-playing, obviously, is the options outside of combat as well. And when you get into it, I think 4th edition hard separated combat and non-combat a little too much. I still feel that way about 5th edition. I think that's something they kept, and that I personally have a criticism of. So I don't think I'm not putting this in a 4th edition only issue. It's also a 5th edition issue, where there's not enough blend between combat and non-combat, which 3rd edition, I think, gave you a lot more. And I'm coming from that from, I played Pathfinder, which is just a little bit more refined 3.5, and the options you have in combat, you have actions that aren't just combat. You can aid another. I mean, there's the help action in D&D, but you can aid another in checks. You can aid each other in attacks. There's flanking. You get a little bit more options, combat wise, but also, as an action, you can do lore to learn important information about a monster. So that's an action where you're learning its weaknesses, its resistances, its attacks, whatever you think is most helpful for you in those moments. That's an action to do, and it feels impactful when you do that action, because you're in there, and it's a blend of combat and non-combat, I think, that makes it more worthwhile in a sense. Whether or not you care about your options, whether or not you care about the gamification of the system, whatever, I think the more you can blend combat and non-combat seamlessly, the more likely you are to have a successful system. I think, I double checked all the actions you can have in 5th edition before, before doing this today, and I think where am I at with this? Where do you go? Where'd you go? Oh yeah, the different actions you can do. The Dungeons Master Guide gives you a few more options, which I think is just a bad design choice to add on options for players in combat in the DMG. I think that's silly. I think, it's inherently something that players should know and have access to, not the DM primarily. And they give you a lot more. They give you the ability to mark people, overrun them, shove aside. They give you the ability to tumble again. You can climb onto creatures. But really, you don't get the ability to do much with social skills. It's all athletics or acrobatics that they give you options for. Like, everything here is that. All of the base options in combat are, very standard and not interesting inherently. They're just basic actions. But the DMG gives you a little bit more interesting stuff, but they're all athletics or acrobatics. And I think that it is severely limiting in, giving an actual choice to a player for a combat that isn't just combat. And I'll turn back to Pathfinder. I go back to 3.5, but I think it's so far the best edition. I think 3.5 is the best edition so far on that, out of the three of them, for seamlessly blending combat and non-combat together. In Pathfinder, you can demoralize. You can use social skills to provoke people, and give a bonus in there. So it's not just, if you're playing a character who you don't think should wield a sword by any means, you can do social skills to help in the combat at that moment. You can do knowledge checks, like I said. You can learn and stuff like that. It's still probably going to be deadly for you to be in combat because it's a combat game, and you'll have your class, which inherently will give you combat skills. But there's a little bit more to it, I think. 5th edition, I think, keeps trying to move back to the proper stuff. Like, if you look at Tasha's, they finally give you the ability to parlay with monsters, and they give you associated skills for being able to learn about those monsters finally, and like what they kind of, it gives you charts for like what they might be interested in, so you can parlay with them easier with the social interactions. And I think that's absolutely a better step in the right direction than where they started. And I think that's a design philosophy issue, though. I'm glad that they're moving towards things, but they're to options and opening things up. But I think they took so long to do it. I don't think it was ever really something they were interested in from the start. And you know, the system isn't really built well for it. It's for the ways that they're opening up the game, I think are good, but I think they kind of go against the grain of what the base system has been designed for. And so they all end up as these optional rules that don't really, I don't think we'll see much play. I think you might introduce, you as a group might introduce one or two every so often as you go, oh, hey, here's this rule or whatever. Or you might, like me, I will be like, oh, you can do this. And then I'm like, oh, I can't find the rule for this, but I know you can do it in Pathfinder. And then like I end up searching forever for whatever way you can do it in the exam. I'm like, oh, okay, here's the rule for it finally. It was kind of buried in something. But where was I at with this? Yeah, so I want to track back to spells a bit. So again, I kind of put out my thoughts already about there's not enough utility spells, so it's hard to do things that are like, there's no utility spells in 4th edition, right? So like that was an issue where you can kind of decide, hey, this is even more of a combat simulator and not much of a social, thing when you can't do utilities when you don't have enough utility options. And then 5th edition, they solved that. They tried going back to a lot more. I don't think it's as good as it could be, but I think they definitely went back more towards utility stuff. Oh, that was hotter than I thought it was going to be. But looking at the way that they do their skill or their seamlessness of social and non or social and combat, it's just not great. It's something that they could take from 3.5. No, you know what? I know where I was going with this. I was going to circle back to spellcasting because rituals. 5th edition introduced rituals in a more accessible way than 4th edition did. But I think the 4th edition rituals are significantly more interesting than the rituals of 5th edition. Because in 5th edition, they want you to be able to... They want you to not rest. They want you to continue adventuring. And they wanted to solve it in a way that was different than the 4th edition approach. So, they have their hit dice for resting instead of their action surges for resting. And then they also have the way that you do ritual casting, where if you know a spell that could be ritually cast, you spend like 10 minutes, maybe an hour, depending on the spell, to cast it without taking up a spell slot, which is good. I like that. But the 4th edition rituals rely on actually doing checks, which I think is super fascinating. And they give you ways to build rituals, and it's a significantly more... I think it gives a lot more interesting roleplay opportunities for spellcasters when you have rituals that rely on checks. Hold on, I want to bring this up for myself. Yes. Okay. So I still have all these tabbed out from over a decade ago. Yeah, so like you can get these skills or these ritual stuff, and they have rituals by level, and like there's skills that they need, the components that they need, and there's like different degrees of success depending on how well you do the ritual, and there's just rituals that are different than the spells, right? So they give you they give you more utility than inherent from your characters, but it's all outside, and I think that's what the issue is. It's your character relying on like the DM or purchasing utility outside of combat. But I think the rituals are just so much interesting. Like you have Linked Portal, you've got Hand of Fate, Hallucinatory Item, Endure Elements, Eye of Warning, Gentle Repose, Hallucinatory Creature, Cure Disease, Detect Object, Consult Mystic Sages, Consult Oracles, Discern Lies. They just have a lot. All their utility went to rituals, and maybe it's because I also heard it in like Raise Dead. That's a ritual. Almost any spellcaster could learn that or use that at that point. I think that's what they wanted, was to give players so they didn't have to focus on they still had utility, but they didn't have to focus their spell slots on utility the same way, which I think is it's a similar philosophy as the ritual casting in 5th edition, but I think this opens up a lot more. I think 5th edition gives you a lot more personalization, but I think the ritual system in 4th edition gives you a lot more interesting ways to use magic as a whole in the system. 5th edition doesn't really give you the ability to they give the DM the ability to create spells, but they never give it as a player option in like downtime for some reason, which it's always been a part of D&D, beforehand, is creating spells as a wizard. That's like your interesting twist of being a spellcaster, is you can design your spells at some point if you put the money into it and the time. 5th edition doesn't give you that as a downtime activity for some reason, which is silly. Obviously, to me, I would obviously allow that because it's fascinating. What kind of wizard doesn't want to create their own spell at some point? Half the spells in D&D were created by like named wizards from like Greyhawk, Mordenkainen, Tasha, Bigby, Tensor. Obviously, you want to have your own spells, right? You want to be able to create your own spells, get your own name slapped on that, and that's an option that's a little bit lacking. And I probably could get crucified for all the 5e stands about how I think the options in 5th edition are so limited. But I think it's so apparent when you look at other systems that 5th edition really is a limiting by choice, or by design. It's limiting by design to make it accessible. So I understand the goal behind it, because that's why it's so popular, is it's accessible. Anyone can really get into it now. And that makes the money. That makes the money go. And every option that you're given on top of that is just more money opportunity for those who want to get into more complex stuff. But overall, you're going to get a lot more people in the base rules by having it so limited and accessible. But, I kind of wish, I think mostly I just kind of wanted to, as someone who came from 4th edition, I kind of wanted to just defend it a little bit here, because I think it gets more flack than it deserves. And, obviously I have my own critiques of 5th edition. I play 5th edition. I try to, in my own games, I try to play by the rules as best I can if the rules allow for something. But, if not, or if I can't find them, I try to default to accessible abilities that I know have happened in the past. So I try to default to things that aren't going to necessarily ruin it all. I had some more things up, didn't I? Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, talking about utility and options and combat. So, 5th edition, obviously following the trend, is a combat-heavy game. It's about combat. There's not as much social interaction or social rulings as there are. There's like some, but not a lot. They've finally expanded to parlaying. But if you look at the DMG, you can get sidekicks, obviously. So, like, that's your NPC classes, your sidekicks. That's warrior, that's spellcaster. And then there's also expert, which is a class for NPCs that aren't combat-based. It's very, it's interesting what they've got, and I don't get I don't get why they don't have the expert class for PCs. They should have that. I've considered making, a craftsman class for players who don't want to be combat heavy but want utility and to do things that aren't necessarily fighting. But, like, they have the expert in here for NPCs but not players. I get players want to feel heroic, but, like, you can feel heroic in different ways, and giving them the option to not be combat viable, I think, opens up a lot more for these players to see the role-playing as not just combat-based, which I think there's a little bit of confusion in the D&D 5e philosophy on, like, do you want people to just kind of be able to do whatever or not, right? Like, do you want them to be tracked into combat because that's what D&D is about? Or do you want them to open up, like, who can do what? Like, what really is, the ability to, do things. Like, okay, I guess as an example, in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, they open up what lineages do, right? So, like, they're saying, hey, you're not hard stuck as a lineage for your ability modifiers to be specifically these traits, because not everybody is like that. Everybody has different specialties. Why can't you do that as a class? It just makes a lot more sense. It's just a small thing that was bothering me. Because I had this up and I realized, like, oh shit, like, this is just right here, slapped in our faces, an option that they just decided players didn't get. Okay, so, that was a good, about first hour, dedicated to D&D, specifically, Pathfinder. I kind of want to spend a little bit of time, actually, instead, talking about universal systems. And this kind of comes into D&D 3.5, because D&D 3.5, the way they made it popular was they decided as a company to release the base rules. Before 3.5, Wizards and then TSR was very protective about their rule set, trying to sue anyone and everyone they could who tried to do anything with their rule set. But 3.5 they decided, hey, how you get D&D popular? You make sure the rules are everywhere. So they finally started allowing for people to make content for D&D or use the rules for D&D in their own products with the open gaming license. And so at first 3.5 dominated the place by using the OGL. And in 5th edition, you get that a lot too with the DM's Guild, where they have the open gaming license, which allows you to use their rule system but not their content. And then the DM's Guild, which allows you to use their content, but it's basically owned by Wizards to a degree. So with 3.5, the open gaming license, came a lot of universal systems. The D20 system, GURPS. I'm trying to think of anything specific, but other than those. But off the top of my head, those are the ones that come to mind. And I realize, options aren't always what they seem. And this comes down again to what the cons of 3.5 were. And that is feet bloat. There's too much stuff. It's not accessible. In all of these universal systems, they sound good until you have to design every little aspect of your world. I've tried running GURPS, and I stopped after a session because it felt like such a goddamn chore to to build up monsters. I was like, I wanted a fantasy world, but like in GURPS, for the options, but as a DM, it was building monsters from scratch was such a fucking pain. I'm not like against universal systems. I just think that you can't have complex ones. The simpler, the better for those. And, obviously, that then leaves an itch to be scratched for people who want more complex games. Like I said, Fate is one of my favorite games. And it's simple. It's real simple. And because of how simple it is, it's simple to design for. And thus you can easily put out anything you want because of its simplicity. And I really enjoy it. But playing it, it's very simple. And sometimes I prefer crunch to my games. A little bit more complexity, a little bit more rules to it. And so but looking at universal systems that have more complex rules, they just make it more of a chore to build for. I've got Genesis on my shelf, which is the Fantasy Flight system that they use for their Star Wars game. And at first I was really into it. That's why I bought it, because I like that system. But it's just a pain to build for, and I think when it comes to, I think we have a stricter concept of whether or not something should be balanced when it comes to homebrew than we do official content. I think players are just really bad at recognizing what they like about balance or imbalance also. And I think you're going to get a lot of complaints about balance when your DM designs all of these classes for you in Genesis or whatever, versus, what is already available in Star Wars or something, or the generic feats in Genesis. I think that's what makes Fate good, is because it's so open-ended with its simplicity that there's no real way to break the system. It's all loose enough that you can't really break the system, especially when it's based off phrasing. That's kind of just up to interpretation at that point. I mentioned the transition between social and non-social, or like combat and non-combat earlier. And I will say, even with Fate, the simplicity of Fate, I think that's also an issue it has, though, as just a criticism of Fate, is there's always a hard concept of, you are in conflict now. What is your goal in conflict? All right, we give you a mental stress track, we give you a physical stress track, we know how you can or cannot succeed this conflict. And they give you nice, hard, results for social interactions, but I think, again, it's too hard line of what is or isn't, what is or is not combat in some way. It's just not, it doesn't flow enough. Even running it and loving it, I sometimes it trips me up. Just like, oh, okay, well, we're deciding right now, we're in conflict. Okay, conflict's over. Stop trying to persuade this person with social stuff, because we did this. You got what you needed out of this. You're trying to take more than what there is. And I think it's, I don't know. I think the simplicity's nice of Fate. Obviously they have, like I said, it's too simplified at some points. I'm trying to think if there's anything else with that. I thought I'd have a lot more interesting things to say about Universal Systems. I kind of gave it a little block of time on its own. But really, everything I want to say about it I kind of covered in the D&D stuff. It's just, the more complex it is, the harder it is to design for, because there's not already a catalog. Well, I guess GURPS had a catalog, but it was too much stuff and not enough focus. And then Fate, sometimes I even struggle with coming up with extra stuff, just because I'm trying to add crunch where there's not, to get a rule set going. But it's in its favor when you don't try to do more crunch with it than is available. It really is about the combined world building of players when you do a universal system, I think. I think universal systems isn't something that traditionally you should be using as a DM, but something you should be using as a gaming group that you build together, as opposed to the DM working on it. I think that helps build up the world more that you're looking for and helps reduce problems with fatigue and burnout. I have a video on burnout and talking about shared responsibility, and I think that should be where universal systems shine, and that's where Fate shines, I guess, is in its world building. It's shared world building. So maybe my issue isn't about the options or issues with universal systems having too much crunch. I think, discussing it now, I think my issue is that you can't go into it like you would D&D, where the DM tends to prep everything. It has to be a shared experience, I think, to really build it up and get utility out of it. Yeah, I think that was a good. I think that's a good end to universal systems. The end of universal systems. No, the end of my topic on it. For now, obviously, unless I think something better. In the future, I don't know exactly what I'll be doing, but I kind of want to talk about dice accessibility. With certain systems, like I really like their use of dice because they have symbols to them that mean something specific to the system. However, that also just means it's harder to play. It's harder to pick up and go. You have to spend money on it, more so than you would. And I think that kind of goes against like 3.5, 5e. They're popular because of accessibility. Sure, you have to get like specific dice shapes, sizes, sides. That's what I was looking for. But overall, they're still easy to get. They're so much more widely available now, especially like D6s are perfect because they're so available. They're the preferred use of dice size or dice sides in most games. And when you get into specialty dice, they really help accentuate the system, but they make it so inaccessible unless you have those dice. Sure, you can like assign numbers on a dice to mean something, but I don't think it's the same as having those symbols. I think it's a lot more back end work on your part than checking out the simplicity of a symbol. Genesis or Star Wars, special dice. They have specialty dice with specific meanings on them of like successes, triumphs, not successes, anti-triumphs. I can't think of what the different words they use for all of them. But they're when playing the system, it's really nice having these dice and these symbols, and you're like, oh wow, I know what I'm doing. I think the problem again with accessibility is they specifically between Genesis and Star Wars, they use different terms for their dice symbols and then use different symbols that mean the same thing as each other. And that's a problem because it's just it's so inaccessible. It's so confusing. We have when I play with my group that has used both, we have both sets of dice, and like it's confusing to remember what is what now, because they're like meaning the same thing, but they're different symbols, and that completely takes out the clarity of having a symbol in the first place. I use Fate dice, or Fudge dice is what Fate uses, which is the plus sign, minus sign, and blank side, which is like a D6, and those are specialty dice, and you can, again, with D6s, you can assign things, but the niceness of a symbol in your system is you don't have to think about it. You can just see it, and you've assigned it in your brain. You don't have to do back-end work to translate what dice mean, and it's something that it's a conflict. I don't think I have a clear idea on the dice accessibility, the specialty dice, on like where I stand with them. I think it, because it's an interesting concept of like, is it worth making your game less accessible by having specialty dice, or is it more worth having the clarity of your results rather than math, at the sake of people having to go into purchasing specialty dice to even play your game? It's not like they can just pick up the core book and go. They have to then find these other dice. I think it's an interesting... I don't know if there's a right answer to that. I don't think there's a right... I don't know if there's a right answer. I just think it's an interesting concept or debate. I played Dice Masters for a while, which is D6s, but they're all specialty dice. Collectible dice game, where each of them were specific to a specific character card. So those are really inaccessible in that sense, where there's like hundreds of dice sets out there with different symbols. Ugh. All right, I think I'm gonna go to break right now, and then I'll be back in maybe 5-10 minutes, maybe around 5:15. And I think we'll go into some design. I had nice, good discussions about design. I think we'll go into maybe some fun design, not experiments, but exercises. Maybe converting a few things from system to system, building something, coming up with brainstorming ideas for systems or whatever. But yeah, I'll just take a quick break here. I'll be back around 5:15, and I'll see you after the break. Let me just transition. Hello and welcome back to the Bumbleskum Morning Design Show. I'm your host, Bumbleskum. I've got here some nice dark Karuba coffee. It's finally cooled down that I can drink it more consistently. So yeah, I think in the second half of the show, I'd like to go over maybe some design experiments or exercises. Kind of looking at what we can. Maybe a few different things. I think, for example, right now, I kind of want to design a subclass for D&D 5e. I think that would be an interesting go-to for right now, kind of off the cuff. So I'm looking at the Barbarian class right now, and it's not the one I'm most familiar with out of the classes, but out of trying to design my own class, I went through and looked at when all the options were, and I realized barbarians are the most standard when it comes to subclasses. The most common times that a barbarian or that a class will get their subclass features is at levels 3, 6, 10, and 14, which the barbarian is the only one who gets them at all of those. So I think that's an interesting balance decision of the most common one, and he's got the most average, things when it comes to that. So I'm looking at the subclasses. They've got the Battle Rager, the Beast, the Berserker, Storm Herald, Totem Warrior, Zealot, Wild Magic. They say they have the Beast and the Berserker and the Battle Rager, right? So those are more physically. They're less spiritual and more physical. And I thought maybe the Beast is interesting, but I think we could go into a mix of Totem Warrior and Beast, and kind of have instead of the Totem Warrior where you get specific aspects at each thing and become more animalistic. I think maybe we could just imitate the animals, right? So I'm thinking maybe we should do a Path of the Giant Boar. So like a barbarian who's there to overrun, and he's there to be like a juggernaut almost. He's gonna push you. He's gonna shove you. He's gonna overrun you. He's gonna do all these things. So I mean, looking at it, the kind of things he gets at level 3. Let's see here. I think it's a very he gets very basic things at level 3 for each of his stuff. I think a lot of his utility comes from just being his rage just being so strong that a lot of his stuff, you get it early on and it's all minor things, because later on, you as a barbarian, you're just going to be a stronger creature because of all your criticals and your rages, and you're a damage dealer. So everything else is kind of just giving you like minor things along with it. So I think looking at it, at level 3, the most base thing about the idea of the boar, I think, is charging, right? I think I don't know if charging is a concept in 5th edition, actually. Movement and position. I don't know that it is. I'm looking at the special dash. There's dashing. I don't think there's charging. Looking at Dungeon Master's Guide, I don't think there's charging. There's overrunning, but I don't think there's charging. So overrun. Let's look at the rules for shoving aside and overrunning. I think and whatever. I think that'll help us better determine some information here. So making an attack. Under this section, there is, for melee attacks, there is shoving a creature. So using the attack action, you can make a special melee attack to shove a creature, either to knock it prone or push it away from you. If you're able to make the multiple attacks with the attack action, this attack replaces one of them. The target must be no more than one size larger than you and must be within your reach. Instead of making an attack, you roll making a strength athletics check tested by the strength athletics or dexterity acrobatics check from the other person. You succeed automatically if the target's incapacitated. You succeed if you succeed, you either knock the target prone or push it 5 feet away from you. And then overrun. When a creature tries to move through a hostile creature space, the mover can try to force its way through by overrunning a hostile creature. As an action or bonus action, the mover makes a athletics check versus their athletics check. The strength, the creature attempting to overrun has advantage on this check if it is larger than a hostile creature, or disadvantage if it's smaller. If the mover wins the contest, it can move through the hostile creature's space once this turn. I think for the giant boar, charging, his 3rd level should kind of interact with that between those two. I don't know which of the two might make more sense right away. I think, honestly, it should just be, I think primarily we should just be charging, right? So I think the way we do this, it should just give us damage dice for overrunning and advantage on shoving or shoving them further, I think, to really get utility out of this ability to trample and charge people, to really gore them. So 3rd level, I think a nice base idea is going to be, out of the two of them, I think it makes more sense to I kind of want to do both. I think both make sense in some way. I'm looking at the abilities people get from their shit. Because they get very base stuff at their level. I think I think overrunning makes a lot more sense, the overrunning thing. I think giving them the ability to do damage, and increasing that damage as you go up, and then kind of giving utility to your shoves, maybe, as you go. So we'll say at 3rd level, they get a damage dice when they overrun, right? We'll say, because it is a check, So we'll say maybe 1d. Maybe there's. I want to say maybe their strength. Yeah, well, we'll say at 3rd level they just get their damage roll. I guess just their strength mod, right? So yeah, 3rd level. When they overrun, they do strength. They do their damage and strength, kind of like an unarmed strike. And it just, it's the idea that you're trampling and like shoving them aside and like knocking into them. So I think that's a pretty standard thing, and I think every bit. Let's see what they have. Someone else that gives it every much, and I think it's the storm. The storm gets things every so often. They increase at. Okay, so they increase at 5th, 10th, 15th, and 20th. So I think the damage dice should also increase at that point. So maybe 1d6 plus strength at 6th or at 5th, 2d6 plus strength at 10th, 3d6 at 15th, and 4d6 at what's it called? 20th. The damage dice I think we might change. We'll look at the spell dice creation stuff to see how that kind of tracks for damage. I want it to be a bit of a setback because it's something that you basically get to do just by doing a move action, not necessarily a standard action. I think. No, I think they're just action. I think they're actions. So I think we'll be good with increasing the dice to make it because that's basically you're choosing to do that instead of attack, and I think that's a more interesting concept. So I think so we're looking at 6th, 10th, and 14th. I think at 6th level is when we can start shoving people, right? So I think so instead of, because I think more than 5 feet makes sense. I think that's a fun concept. Or knocking them prone when it happens. Okay, yeah, I think at 6th level you should be able to do both knock them back and knock them prone. I think that makes a bit more sense when you shove a creature, because then you're just like, and then they go flying and they go backwards and they land on their back or something like that. So I think at 6th level, let me just double check how strong some of these 6th level stuff is. Yeah, they're not very great. So yeah, we'll say at 6th level, when you shove aside, that you can both knock them prone and 5 feet away. Let me see something real quick. Okay, I think just building off of it, 10th level, should be the shove aside. So where you choose the direction they go. I think it should be that you can, when you overrun, you can shove aside. Because I think shove aside uses the special shove attack. Yeah. So it's the same thing. So when shoving, I think you should be able to. You know what? I think if that's the case, that you get that at 6th level. But I think it's when you overrun, you can also shove aside. Because that way you're knocking them out of the way and overrunning them, damaging them. And that's an interesting concept. Now, the tricky part is, I don't know for 15th or 14th level, like a good escalation from there. Maybe... You know, here's an idea. Maybe, you know, at 14th level, if you've already moved 10 feet, maybe you can... let's see, what is the advantage on these? How does advantage work for these? Let's see, overrun. As an action or a bonus action, you can overrun. That's interesting. Oh my god, bonus action as to overrun and damage them and then hit them from behind. That's fascinating. I think that's still good. I think that's still fine. Let me see what does the shove specifically do. Using the attack action, you can shove them. So that is... You have to be no more than one size larger. They must be no more than one size larger. You know, I think that's still fair. I don't think you should be able to keep charging even larger things to shove them. Maybe not. No, you can't have utility everywhere. I don't think you can have utility everywhere. I think that's where your weakness is much larger creatures, trying to shove them around. Where do you gain advantage on something? It's not there. Where did I put it? Oh, here it is. So... Oh yeah, you have advantage if it's for overrunning. I think maybe that if you've moved 10 feet, you should just... Well, I mean, if you're raging, you're probably just going to get advantage anyway on everything to knock it out. So I think that would be a worthless thing to do to give you advantage. So I think if you've moved already 10 feet, you should be able to add an extra 5 feet and D6. I think that makes sense. It seems like little, but I think adding everything up, you know, you run through, say you're level 20, right? And you overrun as a bonus action. That's a bonus action where you're doing 5d6 if you've already moved, and you can shove a creature 15 feet away. Which I think can be really deadly as an option, especially since you can break up your movement. So say you go 10 feet, right? Running up to them, then you go an extra 10 feet. An extra 10 feet. I think there's just ways to like go past them and then keep going. I think I froze. Did I drop frames? I don't know what's happening. Oh, here we go. We're back. Sorry, it froze on me. I don't know. I must have lost a little bit of connection there. So I think, yeah, there's just like ways to like just keep going back and forth and like kind of like a speedster almost, just like fun, interesting things, I think. So I think that's a pretty good path of the boar, because barbarians are so simple to write for. They just have very simple. They have like some of the most simple subclasses. So I think that's really fascinating. Let's see what time is it. 5:30. Okay, yeah, I think that was a cool experiment. I'll probably, release that on my Patreon as like a built subclass too. Speaking of which, I'll probably put all of these as archived on my Patreon. So you'll probably get the ability to watch these as VODs or whatever. I probably won't spam my YouTube with these. I'll probably just archive them on Patreon, and then, so that way they're somewhere for access, but they're not too bad. I know it's paywalled, but I'll be doing a lot of these anyway. I think it'll be more interesting. I don't know, maybe not. Maybe I'll put them on the YouTube. I just don't want to. I don't want to put all my tabletop content on my main channel. But I don't want to flood my tabletop content with this show, because I think I'd get more of these than I do of my actual plays. But maybe that's good. Maybe that's good for the content. I just don't know how people feel about it yet. Maybe I'll ask people, get kind of a feedback or something like that. Like I said, I'll probably at least still make the subclass, or like, I think anything I design on this. Oh, I bumped my mic. I think anything I design on this, I'll try to release on the Patreon at least. In a nice downloadable PDF, accessible stuff. Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. I think it's a good. Because I've designed subclasses for other classes, and this is by far the easiest class that I've had to deal with for this. This is nice. They're like the base. They're so base, and it's refreshing a little bit. I do miss the designing for 4th edition though. Like I said, it was so guided. It was so easy, kind of like this was. They're very minor tweaks with these subclasses. I really wish, and maybe I'll come up with rules for this at some point, but I wish D&D 5e was more, and I think the design philosophy matches this idea. I wish that they had more class options rather than subclasses. Because once you're in a subclass, you're kind of locked into a track, and you don't really have a lot of options going forward unless you have spells. So I think doing class options where you pick and choose at each level, it just feels more on point, a little bit more apt for the design philosophy as they're heading, and also gives a little bit more interesting stuff. Pathfinder 2nd edition, double down on feats and customizability of your class and your ancestry and stuff, which I think is a really good concept. 2nd edition, I haven't really got to play too much. I did the testing of it, but I didn't really get to play. I think I did like a one-shot for the actual system once it came out, but I didn't get to play it too much. But so far, to me, I really like that, how they handle options and ease of access to the game. The sun's coming out, so that's nice. It was dark before, but it's nice little bit of sunlight coming in. Not into my room, my office, but like I can see it through the blinds. That's finally lightening up at 5:30 in the morning. So a bit of an interesting, not a rumor, but I saw this from the guy who wrote the adventure. In Candlekeep Mysteries, they have an adventure. I mean, spoiler alerts. Just close your ears for a second. If you're, come back in like a minute or so if you don't want spoilers. But there's an adventure that feature the Gripply again, which the Gripply is my favorite player race, and I love Gripply. They're so good. They're so cool. They're little frog dudes. I don't like frogs, but I like fictional frog dudes. They're cool. But the guy who designed this one, he said that he designed a player option to play as Gripply, but they took it out when they gave you the book. They cut it out. They give you a Gripply warrior as like a monster, but they cut out the actual player race. So I'm thinking maybe we should do a what is their challenge rating? Okay, I think maybe we should just do quickly like a nice little player race for the Gripply. So people, if you listen to this, you might be, oh, okay, that's really cool. So if you don't know, Gripplys are like tree frog type humanoid races. They're small. They're known for their reduced tech, and their like tongue abilities and their jumping, stuff like that. So I think starting, just looking even at the monster, I think for ability scores, if you're a Gripply, I think you should get a +2, and 2 +1s. Because if I were designing it, I would put a +2 in Dex, a +1 in Wisdom, and a +1 in Strength. Not Strength. Let's just do it. I think a +2 and a +1 makes sense. It's a base thing, but I think +2 in Dex and +1 in Wisdom makes sense. You would have proficiency in Athletics, Stealth. You would probably know Primordial as a language. I think, obviously, as your lineage feats, I think you would get 3 things. 1, hold breath, which you can hold your breath for 20 minutes. I think that makes sense for the Gripply as a frog. I think that's pretty standard for the Gripply. And then their standing leap, where they can leap 30 feet horizontally or 20 feet vertically from a standing position. I think that makes sense because they are jumpers. They jump tree. They're like tree frogs, basically. They go leap from tree to tree in a way. And it helps. I mean, they're so much more interesting than bullywugs. Bullywugs are gross little toad dudes, but Gripplys are like the cool, sleek, mini amphibian dude that you get to play. I don't know. It's just really interesting. And then the tongue. So you can make a tongue attack. The Gripplys make a tongue attack that can help grapple and restrain. Normally, I would say that your tongue should be able to be prehensile. I don't recall if tieflings have prehensile tails or not. I should look that up real quick. Because if they do, I think I would add prehensileness to, and Tabaxi too. If there's prehensile tails, I think you should get a prehensile tongue, because I think you could get them before. Let's see, real quick. Let's see. Look, races. Tiefling. Do they have prehensile tails? I don't think they do. That might just be a Pathfinder thing. I think that might be a Pathfinder thing. Alright, then we'll look at Tabaxi, see if they get a prehensile tail. They don't. Okay, I won't add a prehensile tongue then. But I think a tongue grappling attack makes sense. I think that's a good addition. I mean, there's not too much more. I think you should also get like proficiency in tridents. I think that's an interesting concept. But I think it's a pretty good standard Gripply race. I love Gripply. I had a character that I was going to play for I think 3.5 that was a Gripply, and he was Prince Bumbleskum, the Gripply Ranger who dual wielded rapiers while riding his royal riding dog into battle and just ride by attacking, trying to get crits off. Very stern dude, very serious man. No, never mind. I was gonna say, the thing about the races in D&D, I think the way D&D Beyond gives it to you, I think people get too open about what lineages they allow for everything. Where's the Van Richter's guide? Oh, here it is. Lineages. Oh, lineages is just its own race, basically. That's interesting. That's interesting. They don't have the Dampire, Hexblood, or Reborn as their own thing. They just have it as one. So it's like little sub-races of lineages. That's interesting. I thought they were going to move towards lineages as their standard. I know they have... I know they have like owl folk and rabbit folk and stuff like that as Unearthed Arcana. But I legit thought lineages was the direction they were heading. And if that's not the case, that's fascinating to me. No, really, I thought that's where they're going. That's a surprise to me that they didn't do it that way. It's its own, technically, a race. Wow. I think lineages would have been more fascinating, or like templates that you can adjust your player race with. Like you could be a Dampire Centaur or something like that, and you just put the template over it or something. But I don't think they did that. I don't think they're doing that. They should. They should do that. They should do that. I think that's the way to go more customizable with what they're doing. Interesting. The only ideas I have right now for races is sub-races. I was thinking of maybe like a sand dwarf, like a dwarf that lived in the desert of some sort and like dealt with sandstone and stuff a lot more. Or like Gemforged or Nimblewrights for Warforged. Like maybe like you could break off your own body for spell components as a Gemforged, or Nimblewrights I think are just cool constructs, and I think you could easily add them in as a sub race for Warforged. I like constructs. I like construct races. I think they're interesting. Not enough of them. Not enough, at least sub races for the Warforged. I know they're an Eberron thing, but spell plague and all, you can just add shit to whatever, and it makes sense. Oh, you know what? I thought of mole people. Not necessarily dwarves, but like actual like mole people. Mole folk. I don't have a name for them though. I think they're pretty cool. Because then you could have like a sub race of like like the North American mole, the common mole, and the star nose mole. I think those would be interesting diversions of the same sub races. Draconic races. I didn't know they added that. Let's take a look at this, the Draconic races. I didn't know that they had this. Or increase 3 different scores by 1. Okay. Chromatic Dragonborn. Oh, is that a Gem Dragonborn? Yep. Isn't this already Cobalt unearthed? I'm a little confused because they have... I don't know why this is Unearthed Arcana. I'm trying to figure out what's different about these. What's different about this? Okay, the Dragonborn race and Player's Handbook is one way to reflect a character with Dragonborn or with dragons somewhere far back in their ancestry. This document offers 3 variant Dragonborn races you can choose instead if you want a character with clear connections to specific character. But they give you that ability, as well as a new Kobold race when you're making a new character from one of these. What is different about the Kobold? Draconic they have the Draconic Legacy and the Draconic Roar. I think that's different. No 1 cantrip from the Sorcerer spell list. Unarmed strike with your tail. I need to open up the regular Kobold to get some context here. Yeah, we're looking at some stuff. We're gonna see the differences and see how that's interesting for D&D 5e specifically, obviously. Kobold. Yeah, this is weird. I saw everything else. This is my first time noticing that they did this for. Yeah, because you have pack tactics as a Kobold normally.
Let's see. Pack tactics, grovel, cower, bag, sunlight sensitivity. Huh. I thought sunlight sensitivity was just a dark vision thing. Huh. Okay, so then the regular one. So you get a lot more dragon stuff from this. This is interesting. So Draconic Legacy, you have advantage throws on being frightened. You know one cantrip from the sorcerer spell list. You can make unarmed strikes with your tail. That's really cool. Draconic Roar, as a bonus action, you can let out a Draconic Roar with the enemies 10 feet away from you. Till the next turn, your allies have advantage against attack rolls against any of those creatures who would hear the roar. And you can use it several times. That's really cool. Just a variant on the Cobalt. I don't know if I would play that over the regular Cobalt, though. It makes you more heroic and gives you a cantrip. But Pack Tactics is pretty cool as an ability. They don't have the... maybe I'm thinking of goblins who have the... can fight things that are bigger than them. Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, they do add abilities for the chromatic and the gem and the... Okay, I like these options. These are good options to go further into it. I do think it's interesting that they're going into gem dragons, but not like their standard like catalysm or planar dragons or anything like that. Ugh, talking for 2 hours straight. Am I right? So I'm just closing shit out. Yeah, I think more options better. It's a little frustrating because I feel like there is a better fantasy game that could be made from a hybrid of 5e D&D and 2e Pathfinder, but there's no way you can make that and be successful. That's just another fantasy heartbreaker. Even though I think that there's a better option by doing this. I wish I could do it, and it'd be interesting if people were actually interested in that, but I don't think they would be. I'm currently working on a more magical realism system, I think, based off a setting that I came up with a long time ago. It's come work and up and down on the progress for that. It's not like it's on the back burner. It's not like my priority or anything like that. I'd rather make viable content at the moment than work on that system that I'm only half sure what I think about how it should work. And maybe I'll talk about that another time on another thing. I was going to do this every day. I think I might do this once a week. I'm going to do this once a week, and I will put it on the YouTube. I'll do that. I think that's a good, fair thing. I'll do it once a week at some point. I don't know if it's always going to be Monday mornings. I wanted to do Sunday mornings, but on Sunday mornings is Overwatch League, so I'd rather watch Overwatch League at that point. So I think Monday mornings start off the week strong. Get these up by Monday afternoon or something, and boom, 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 boom. There we go. It's been an hour and 50 or so. I'm gonna let you. I'm just gonna say, off the bat, I think, yeah. So these will be on YouTube. I'll just end with some social stuff. If you'd like to, get more from me personally, you can find me on Twitter at Bumbleskum. The Interdimensional Library is the YouTube channel that I'll be posting this content to. If you want more Interdimensional Library, you can find them on Twitter at IDL_RPGS to get announcements of like when we go live, when things go up, if there's any specific news. Not really. If you'd like to see more shows or hear more shows, I'm trying to get back on schedule with uploading the backlog I have of content from D&D shows that I was doing. But you can find on any podcasting thing, I think, the Interdimensional Library, which has some D&D campaigns for podcasting, or at bumbleskum.com/IDL. You can just download them directly from there, from the website. You can... Oh yeah, we record Saturdays. We're recording a game that I'm calling Frontier Psychology. It's a murder mystery treasure hunt supernatural game using Fate Core. It takes place in a small made-up town called Delhaven, Texas. It's been pretty fun so far. I think it's been really interesting. It's a little goofy, but it works. It's fun. But those are on Saturdays at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. This show I'll try to record every Monday at 4 a.m. Central Standard Time, and then I'll go. I'm hoping for a 2-hour show every week. I'll have enough content for that, versus just an hour long or something. I'll come up with topics to make it work that way. But yeah, thank you all for joining in on listening to this. If you have, if you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe, maybe, check out, subscribe or not, check out the other shows, check out the actual plays that I'm doing. I think you'll really enjoy what my players are bringing to the table. Yeah, check us out on Saturdays. Cool. I think that's it. Have a good rest of your Monday morning, or whenever you're watching this, in the later parts.